Hi guys, so really useful means by which we can actually measure and see where economies are going in terms of our economic growth is the Solow model. It's also known as the neoclassical growth model, and it really does help us to explain why some economies are growing faster than others. So let's take a look. Helps to explain long-run economic growth by looking at capital accumulation and increase in productivity. So when countries acquire capital goods, they become more productive, of course. Now, the Solow model itself really focuses on what's known as a production function. And that is that production is a function of a number of variables. And the variables we're going to focus in on here are labour and capital. So the aggregate production function expresses national output as a function of two inputs, and that is labour and capital. So if you increase labour and capital by 10%, you may get a 10% increase in output. But of course, both of these areas are subject to diminishing marginal returns. And let's look at that here. Each successive unit of capital will produce a declining increase in units of output generated. So if you just consider a farmer, for instance, who may be farming his fields or ploughing his fields by using a cow or a horse, and then suddenly he acquires a tractor. The actual transformation in terms of that productivity that can be generated is huge, and suddenly his output as a worker increases enormously. That would enable him to sell more of his goods and obviously increase his income quite significantly. Now, this is reflected quite nicely on our mini Solow model here that I've drawn out, where we've got output per worker on our y-axis and capital per worker on our x-axis. So let's just concentrate on this black line firstly. This is savings and investment per worker. So this black line, as capital increases, so does output and income per head. Let's just refer back to what we've got here. So that farmer who then acquires that tractor is able to enjoy that big increase in output that takes place as a result of acquiring that one capital good, and that really does cause a huge increase in the output per worker there, as we can see. So that's really significant. But acquiring a second tractor is not going to be as productive. A third tractor, again, there's these diminishing marginal returns that we can see quite clearly there. Okay, and as a result, so does savings and investment. Now, just think about this. So if that worker is now more productive and is earning more because they've got more to sell, then they're able to save some of their income. As they save some of their income, they may decide to acquire other capital goods, which might be other farm machinery, which would fit and coincide with the tractor. That may help, but it won't be as productive as initially acquiring that tractor on its own. So does savings and investments. So that's a really important factor here, though. Income rises, so does savings and investment, but at a diminishing rate. So we can see there is this diminishing marginal rate of return from increases in capital goods, and that additional saving and investment in capital goods doesn't generate those same returns that we saw initially down here. Okay, so that's a really important point. Now, what we also see is this red line, which represents the capital replacement requirement per worker. So this capital replacement line really reflects points where output per worker and capital per worker are increasing at a constant rate. So we can see that given the fact that it's a straight line. So a 10% increase in output per worker would be matched by a 10% increase in capital per worker. Now, here you've got to remember that capital goods will depreciate. They require maintenance, they suffer wear and tear, and as such, they need to that needs to be accounted for. And this line helps us to understand that. So investment in capital per worker needed to keep the capital labour ratio at its original level. So we can see at these points, savings and investment is greater than the actual capital replacement required, because you're acquiring brand new capital. But as that capital begins to age, then of course there is going to be a greater need to actually replace those capital goods. Up here, where we can see that the actual capital replacement required is greater than the savings and investment. As such, some of your capital goods would end up depreciating completely and being useless in terms of their value, because they're no longer productive, because they haven't been well enough maintained, because your savings and investment isn't high enough to actually maintain them. Thus, you would reduce to point A. Down here, we can see savings and investment. Investment in capital goods is growing, and as such, the actual depreciation and capital replacement requirement will be growing. Thus, the economy will reach this steady state of investment, and we can see that at point A. So therefore, why can we understand that China has been growing so rapidly over the last 40 years? Well, it's because of the capital accumulation that's been taking place. But this also helps us to understand the fact that other economies grow at much slower rates because of the fact that they have already acquired a lot of capital. That capital needs to be maintained and depreciate, but they need to invest in their labour force and really develop the productive potential of their labour force if they want to grow further. Okay, great stuff, guys. I hope that was all right. See you next time.